Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Leslie.
Thank you for speaking with me today.
You're welcome.
So, when you first emailed me, you said that you had kept your head down during school, and you're now a practicing mental health counselor.
Yeah.
And now that you're self-employed, you feel like you are able to talk more freely about these things.
hmm
And I'm curious about what what's how did this start for you? What drew you to the practice of therapy? What made you want to go to school to be a therapist? And what did you expect from studying and from working as a counselor?
I was really drawn to this field because I had had some pretty positive experiences myself in therapy. I was able to make some changes in my life and just have a more fulfilling life overall. And I wanted to be able to do similar work. I was in a job, I live in Illinois and I was working for the state of Illinois.
Mhm.
And it wasn't a very fulfilling career. It wasn't something that I enjoyed, and I was in midlife, and it was either like change now or feel like I'm stuck. Although looking back, that's not really that's not really the truth. You can change at any time. um, but I was in a position where I was able to go back to school, to not have to work full time, and to pursue just a different career, one that I thought would be more fulfilling.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that's why I was drawn to it. And I thought a graduate program would really prepare me for this job, that there would be robust education, and I would finish graduate school and be ready to deal with almost anything that comes
Mhm.
my way.
Mhm. So you had had good experiences, and you'd felt like your experiences in therapy had improved your life. Your job wasn't very meaningful to you, and you saw an opportunity to really do something that was of value to yourself and
Yeah,
others. Yeah.
yeah. And actually, I've also had some counseling experiences that were not all that great, and
Mhm.
that wasn't something that I was really aware of until after I had gone through graduate school and started learning about ethics. And
Okay.
then I could look back and think, oof, there were
Yeah.
some ethical issues with some of the things that were going on
Mhm.
in the counseling relationship.
Mhm. So you saw ways that you would do it differently.
Yeah.
Mhm.
hmm
And then when you went to school, um, what was that experience like for you, and how was it different from what you were expecting? And how did it measure up to what you expected? I guess I don't want to lead you.
Okay.
I'm just curious.
Um, I'm not even sure. I don't know if I had a really clear expectation for what I would get out of graduate school. I had graduated from my undergrad many years before. I was late 30s, early 40s when I went to graduate school. So it had been a long time since I graduated from college. Um, I couldn't really remember what it was like to be a student. So a lot of what I was a lot of what I was experiencing was just self-doubt about my abilities to measure up academically.
Mhm.
What I found was there were pretty low academic standards.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, it's I went through a clinical mental health counseling program, so that is under the College of Education.
Mhm.
Um, I needed to take the GRE, but my professor said, we don't even look at the numbers. Don't
Oh,
worry about it.
wow.
Yeah. There was a pretty big focus on not wanting to like gatekeep,
Mhm.
to not want to prevent people from being able to come into a program and pursue a career with this. And
Mhm.
when I heard about that, I thought, but there is a client or a patient on the other side who needs a counselor who knows what they're doing and who's smart and who can sit with ambivalence and
Mhm.
uncertainty.
Mhm.
And if you're letting anybody in, these may not be good. These may not be good fits for this field.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
what I found was across the board fairly low academic standards.
Okay.
Um, I got straight A's,
Mhm.
and my guess is if I had been taking um, taking a graduate course such as this, say 25 years ago, that would not have been the case.
Mhm.
That the papers that I wrote or the projects that I did would not have just gotten A's. Like
Mhm.
that was the default grade. I had one professor who was an adjunct. She normally didn't teach. And when she turned back our first paper, she was really clear about her displeasure
Mm.
in people's writing. She said, a lot of you got B's and you really should have gotten C's. And people were so angry with her. It
Mm.
was hard for them to hear that feedback.
Really?
So I was surprised. I was surprised about the low academic standards, and then also a little bit relieved because I knew that I could do well on paper.
Mhm. Mhm. So
Yeah,
it was just a lower level of rigor and expectation.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had taken some classes in other you know, I my course, it was a 60 credit hour program through the clinical mental health counseling program, but I didn't need to, but I took some classes in eating disorders to get a certificate. And those classes were definitely more rigorous.
Mhm.
Um, the expectations were different. I took another class, I can't remember you know, which class it was, but it was outside of the counseling program. And I didn't do as well on papers, and I got more specific feedback. And I got feedback like, if you make some changes, you'll have a better paper and also a better grade.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was not feedback I was getting in the counseling program.
Yeah. So aside from the lack of, I guess, academic, um, I guess the low academic standards,
Mhm.
what were there content differences? I'm wondering if there was concern about the social justice sort of ideology and how that appeared in the program for you.
That concern didn't really come up for me while I was in the program. That concern came up after the fact, once I started questioning some things.
Okay.
I got my undergrad in sociology, and
Mhm.
so I was primed for critical social justice.
Okay.
I was like, I wasn't even, I don't think I was aware that, this is interesting. This belief that, you know, this group over here is like a sacred caste, and this group over there is, they're just terrible people.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, because that was kind of what I was learning in sociology so
Mhm.
many years ago. And there was part of me that wanted to be a good person.
Mhm.
And there's also a part of me that's always been interested in, some of the inequalities of life. There
Mhm.
are some inequalities,
Yeah.
and they affect people really negatively at times. And so
Yeah.
I bought into a lot of it.
Okay.
Um, but there were some things that didn't sit well with me. So for example, um, I can't even remember which class this was in, but a doctoral student came to talk to us about LGBT issues.
Okay.
And he said, if your partner comes out as trans, you should be really happy that they trust you enough to tell you.
Mm.
And perhaps, but this is a person who was in his 20s. I don't think he could even get into the mind of a middle-aged woman who'd been with her husband for 20 years. And news like that would not be happy. News
No.
like that would feel like you've been duped, that
Yeah.
you've been misled.
Mhm.
um
That would be an
he
incredibly complex experience for that person, even if they felt positive for their partner.
right, because
And yeah.
if you weren't open about this, what else weren't you open about?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was also the person who told me I had a very masculine presentation,
Wow.
and
Wow.
I look like this, which I is not particularly masculine, I don't think. But when I would go to classes, I would wear yoga pants and sweatshirts.
Mhm.
But I also was a middle-aged woman who'd been married for a very long time. I wasn't a person in their 20s who was still in the dating market and looking for a
Trying to be
partner.
cute. Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
it's almost like this person wasn't able to take context into consideration and why my presentation may be different from my peers.
Mhm. Mhm.
And also, who cares?
Yeah, that seems
like
like a really strange thing to
to point out in a group
yeah,
of people.
unless you're in a conversation with them where you're asking for that kind of feedback. And
Right.
I'm assuming
Yeah,
you
no, this was
know,
I know a group circle. We're talking about
okay,
LGBT issues, and he just pointed
pointed
that
it out.
out. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so there were things like that
Yeah.
that stuck out to me like that doesn't that doesn't seem right.
Mhm,
You know, I grew up in the 80s. You
mhm.
know, there wasn't so much pink is for girls, blue is for boys. You know, it was very much you can do what you want to do. And if you wear pants, it doesn't make you any less of a girl. And I feel like some of the gender ideology is just taking us back to regressive stereotypes.
Absolutely.
Um, I also remember a time when a trans, I don't know if it was a staff member, I don't think this person was a professor, but they were definitely employed by the university, but
Mhm,
I'm just going to say he. I don't know what pronoun this person uses, but he came to talk to the class. Um, and this was shortly after Bruce Jenner had come out and was now being called Caitlyn.
mhm,
And the staff members, you know, take on Bruce Jenner was, well, he was only famous because he was, you know, a white man with power. And it's like,
mm.
okay, there's also the Olympic thing
Yeah.
that I don't know, might have played a role.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, Things were really seen through the lens of gender, sexual orientation, race.
Mhm,
Um, other contexts weren't taken into account,
mhm,
and so some of these things weren't sitting right with me. I didn't say anything at the time. I was scared to. You
mhm,
know, if you question some of this, it
mhm,
you would definitely be seen as a bad person.
mhm,
And
mhm.
I'd seen this happen with some of my colleagues. You know, somebody would question something and then the whole class would kind of turn on them.
Mhm, mhm. So you, based on your kind of your sociological perspective,
Hmm.
you you bought into a lot of these things without too much difficulty.
Right.
And then there were a few jarring moments, primarily around gender ideology, where
Yeah,
you
gender ideology and race.
race, okay.
Hmm.
So, and that's been one of my big criticisms of applying these concepts to individual psychology, is that
Hmm.
it is sociological and it does look at people in terms of group membership, and it misses the nuance of the individual and the potential for such a variety of experiences and worldviews within
Hmm.
individuals that don't adhere to whatever observable groups you might put those people into.
Right. It doesn't take people's life into context. It doesn't
Mhm,
see people as individuals. And
mhm,
when you're in, you know, when you're in the therapy setting, there may be times when you're doing group therapy, a lot of it is individual therapy,
mhm,
where it's you sitting down with the other person and seeing them as a complex human being.
mhm.
And this ideology, it strips people of that. It's
Yeah,
not healthy.
yeah, absolutely. So for you, as you described, kind of going along with it at the time and not really being too, so you kind of had these moments where you're starting to become aware that this isn't quite right.
Mhm.
What's the arc for you of realizing that you felt very differently about this? How did that happen? How did you go from where you were when you were accepting it to where you are
Mhm.
now, where you're looking at it and critical of what was being taught?
There were a couple of times in grad school where I started questioning it. I had mentioned a few of those
Mhm,
instances. There was another time, I can't remember what the shooting was because unfortunately in this country there are many.
mhm,
But there was basically like, for lack of a better term, a healing circle for people to discuss a police shooting. And I went. Um, I felt like I needed to go because I was afraid that there wouldn't be very many white people there. And if there aren't very many white people there, what does that say? And so I wanted to be
mhm.
a good white person.
Okay.
Um, and also I knew some of these people who were troubled by this. And it is,
Mhm,
you know, it is troubling when you see interactions that go wrong and people die.
mhm,
Um, and I remember having been taught that you should listen to people of color, just be quiet and listen. And I'm like,
mhm,
okay, I'll just be quiet and listen.
mhm,
And during that circle, one of the doctoral students in my program made a comment about, like, I see white people in here and they're really quiet and I don't know why that is.
Hmm.
And I thought, "Ooh, this is
Yeah.
being put in a position
A
where
double bind.
you cannot make a good choice here."
Right.
And a white woman started to speak, and then she started to cry, and I was so anxious because I thought, oh no, it's white women's tears. You're
Yeah.
not supposed to do that. This
Right.
is wrong.
Yeah.
And I just remembered feeling really unsettled. And so there were these
Mhm.
chips that happened.
Okay.
But I didn't really start questioning it a lot until the summer of 2020.
Mm.
That's when the riots started.
Mhm.
That's when, people just had these declarations, trans women are women.
Mhm.
Um, or they would have declarations like Black Lives Matter. And it's like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Right.
Only a monster would argue against that.
Right. Right.
But, what's on the surface and what's underneath are two
Mhm.
really different things.
Mhm. Mhm.
If on the surface, what people are saying is people just want to pee. Trans people just want to pee. That's all they want to do. They're not trying to scare you in the bathroom.
Mhm.
And I think for probably the majority of trans people, that's correct. They just want to live their lives. They don't want to be political. They just want to
Mhm.
do them,
Mhm.
work in their job, maybe go out for drinks after work and, do things like that. But,
Mhm.
but if things are, um, these concepts are, or this ideology is brought out in such a way that it's really difficult to challenge anything without then being seen as the bad object. And
Yeah.
so once I saw the riots and people making excuses for rioting and for destruction, and once some of the COVID stuff came in, I started questioning a lot of what was happening then, and then looking back and questioning a lot of what I had learned in school.
It sounds like you were going through a series of contradictions, experiencing contradiction over and over. So you had like
Right.
the gentleman who spoke to your class about trans
Hmm.
people embracing their trans partner coming out, and
Hmm.
you were kind of questioning. There's a contradiction here because the person who's being who the partner of this person is going through something also, and we're not acknowledging what this person's going through. So
Right.
this is sort of a shallow view of this, and then you're hearing
Mhm.
um, the talk around the white women's tears and white people be
Mhm.
quiet and also white people speak up, and so you're facing
Right.
these over and over, and it's kind of chipping away at
Mhm.
your acceptance of the belief system.
Right.
When did you become, or are you, what do you I don't want to put words in your mouth. I say that a lot, but I feel like I want to ask these questions, but I want to hear your genuine response and not
Mhm.
just an answer to something I'm asking. The do you see it as a belief system? And
Yeah.
if so, when did that start to become a part of your awareness of this?
I think again around summer of 2020,
Okay.
I started to consume different media. I
Okay.
didn't realize I was in a bubble.
Okay.
I was a lefty liberal democratic voting person pretty
Yeah.
much my whole life, and I didn't realize that I was in such a bubble that I was in. And so I
Mhm.
started to listen to Benjamin Boyce and
Mhm.
Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying and reading Douglas Murray. And I started to question some things. What I'm seeing now, it seems like it's a secular religion, like that religious piece that we have lost over the
Yeah.
decades is being filled. Um, we have religious doctrine, you know, we have religious garb, whether it's a flag or a pin.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I see it as almost like a secular religion, and that if people don't believe in the secular religion, they're heretics
Mhm.
and they'll be punished.
And I'm so glad to be talking with you because I think that it's really a valuable reminder that people are just where they are with regard to awareness of this? I mean, people, it's easy to be polarized, and it's easy to
Mhm.
demonize the people who are going along with these ideas.
Mhm.
But I don't know, I think the word waking up is kind of overused and it's overly simple, but it's easy to say. So waking up to this, kind of like
Mhm.
coming out of a cult. People come out in stages,
Mhm.
and there are good people who are erroneous in their thinking maybe, but still doing it for what they think are the right reasons, feeling like
Oh,
they're
absolutely.
compassionate and empathetic. And so I think
Mhm.
that I'm very curious about how that unfolded for you, and what was your relationship to yourself in this period of time? How were you thinking about your own participation or questioning of things that you'd taken as on faith prior?
Mhm.
This is I'm very inarticulate with this. I'm trying to ask you questions and I'm feeling myself stumble all over the place, but I hope that made sense.
That's fine. So, I remember being in classes in graduate school and kind of joining a pile-on and not
Okay.
knowing at the time that that's what I was doing, because it seemed like I was on the right side and I wanted to be on the right side. I wanted to be a good person.
Mhm.
And in retrospect, now I cringe when I think of that.
Yeah.
And part of this ideology that's so damaging is you see people as good or bad,
Mhm.
and if they don't believe everything that you believe, if they don't align with you politically, then they're bad.
Mhm.
um and people are just more complex than that.
Yeah.
And so, I look at some of my behavior in grad school, and even though I was on the periphery, there were times when I either joined in or I was silent.
Mhm.
um and I didn't need to be. I'm in a very different position now. I'm self-employed, so I can say things that I didn't feel comfortable saying before. Whether it's, if I'm in a continuing education event on um, working with a trans population, I can put in the question like, hey, what about, has anybody thought about how puberty blockers or hormones might affect bone health, especially if people have an eating disorder? That's
Mhm.
not a question I would have asked before.
Mhm.
It also is probably not something I was aware of before,
Mhm.
because it was just affirming is good, not
Mhm.
affirming is bad. Um, I've already forgotten your question.
No, my question was a really big jumble of just
Mhm.
just curiosity. But uh, so you talked about how the splitting, like the
Mhm.
people are good or bad. And one of the
Right.
things that I think is it's so obvious to me how this way of looking at things promotes cognitive distortions and
Mhm.
other maladaptive psychological defense mechanisms like splitting.
Right.
And uh, what are your thoughts on that, and how you've seen that play out?
Um, yeah, I think a lot of this ideology promotes very poor mental health.
Mhm.
Um, again, if like when I think about the trans issue, what I am seeing happen is teachers, therapists, doctors wanting to align with maybe the child who identifies as trans. And then if a parent is questioning that, then the parent is bad. The parent isn't affirming, maybe we need to call Child Protective Services.
Mhm.
Or on the other side of the political spectrum, you see, or I see, politicians wanting to paint the doctors and the therapists and the teachers as all bad, and maybe we need to call Child Protective Services.
Mhm.
Um, there isn't a lot of space for nuance, for complexity, for seeing people as full human beings that may not be on one particular political side or another.
Mhm.
um, and that's not healthy. When we are dividing the world into good and bad, we're dividing ourselves into good and bad, and we want to feel like good people,
Mhm.
and that can give us license to then behave really badly.
Mhm.
um, I see this ideology tearing at families. A lot of times family is the biggest source of support for people, not always. A lot of times it is. And if you are willing to write off your family because they don't believe what you believe, that is not going to lead to better mental health.
Mhm.
If you are going to be aggrieved because somebody has committed a microaggression, you are not going to be in good mental health. Also, I remember learning about microaggressions, and if you can't deal with a microaggression, how in the heck are you going to deal with somebody talking about very different sexual fantasies, or their abuse history, or how they've maybe abused their kids, or like there's a lot of difficult content that people hear when they're therapists.
Mhm.
There are times when your patient is not going to like you,
Mhm.
and they are not going to hold back on that.
Mhm.
They'll tell you that.
Mhm.
If you are so fragile that a microaggression is going to make you spin out, how are you going to deal with regular difficulties of life?
Mhm. Mhm.
And if we are then teaching our clients about this, we're helping them become more fragile. We're not helping them become resilient. We're not helping them to meet the challenges of life and have a fulfilling life that is full with difficulty.
Mhm. So in these ways, looking back at your training, do you feel like it was an adequate preparation?
I
Or
feel like it was very inadequate. Now, my program, I went through before our discussion, I went through my syllabi and was looking at different things. I had different things. I had 14 teachers,
Mhm.
4 were professors, 9 were doctoral students, 1 was an adjunct. Of those 14, only 6 were licensed,
Okay.
and only 3 of them had recent experience.
Oh, wow.
So I was being taught by people who did not have recent counseling experience.
Mhm.
And I think any graduate counseling program really needs to have people who are licensed, who are working, or who have worked very recently.
Mhm.
Because somebody who got their doctoral degree 25 years ago and practiced for 6 years is not going to be that effective as a teacher.
Mhm. They're out of touch.
They're totally out of touch. They don't know what it's like to be a therapist
Mhm.
because they're not doing it. Yeah, I talked to some of my classmates about this. Many of us felt very unprepared for this job because of graduate school. And when you spend a lot of class time talking about microaggressions, or talking about gender, or talking about race, what you're not doing is spending class time on clinical preparation.
Mhm.
That hurts people.
Mhm.
That hurts marginalized people.
Mhm.
I had an addictions class in summer,
Mhm.
and summer classes are shorter classes. We had 11 meetings. Of those 11 meetings, the whole meeting was taken up talking about the Pulse shooting. The
Mhm.
other was taken up talking about BLM,
Mhm.
and one was spent on presentations. That means we had 8 class meetings
For
to
addiction.
learn about addictions.
Mm.
And even if you're not specializing in addictions in this field, you are going to have people who struggle with them, or they have family members who do. You spend time on things that don't, if the program is spending time on things that don't help prepare people to be clinically effective, they are doing a disservice.
Mhm. Mhm. So they missed an opportunity to work
Yes,
more on what we were there to study, and instead
absolutely.
shifted the focus to how you should feel and react to socio-political events.
Right. How you should feel and act. And also, there's this expectation that therapists are also activists,
Mhm. Mhm.
that we change society.
Mhm.
And if you haven't been in the counseling room in a long time, if you haven't worked with people and you have no idea how difficult it is to help a person go from a depressive episode out of a depressive episode, and to have, move towards a meaningful, fulfilling life,
Mhm.
like, that is a lot of work.
Mhm.
I don't know who thinks they can do that and also change society.
Yeah,
Like, that is beyond our scope.
it is. Yes, absolutely.
It's not appropriate to to push that.
Mhm.
And also, you know, different people have different political leanings. Okay, you want people to be activists? Well, maybe somebody wants to be an activist in a way that you don't like.
Right.
And then what?
And it is a very, very cookie cutter, like you said, a bubble. It is a
Mhm.
very tightly controlled orthodox worldview that is
It
being,
is.
yeah.
Yeah. And I saw that not just in graduate school, but I also see that just in life now. You
Mhm.
know, I've had people I know who are therapists who will make comments about like, oh, you're going to Florida, huh, pretty conservative area there.
Hmm.
Do you say this to your clients? Do you make these comments? And how would that feel for somebody who is conservative? Or
Mhm.
what would happen if somebody's politics changed?
Mhm.
You know,
It's
okay,
like it's just accepted that you're gonna be a little derisive about these things, and that's just
right,
normal.
right. Or
Mm.
it's accepted that this ideology has the correct assumption
Mhm.
about politics. And if you don't, something's wrong with you. And if you
Mhm.
don't, you're not doing right by your clients.
Mhm.
And then you're not being a good therapist.
How is this impacting your work now, or is it?
Not really. I'm in
Mhm.
private practice.
Mhm.
Very few people come to talk about politics. Once in a while they do, but when you are in this job, it is really important that you see people as complex human beings,
Mhm.
that you see the good and the bad that is in every single person, that's in us too.
Mhm. Mhm.
If you cannot sit with that, if you cannot be with that, you're not going to do your job well. So in private practice, I get to choose, you know, who I have as a patient, if I'm going to take a patient or not.
Mhm.
It really doesn't affect me now.
Mhm.
I'm really glad that I'm doing private practice. I know if I were in a treatment facility, there would be different pressures.
Mhm.
So one way that this does affect me, when I need to step somebody up to a higher level of care and I'm looking at different treatment centers, everything is taken
Mhm.
over
Mhm.
by this ideology.
So it's hard
And
to find who you can refer to.
right, because if somebody is being that overtly political, how can I trust them to provide really good therapy? If somebody really has a difficult time just accepting reality, how can I trust that they're going to have a good therapeutic milieu
Mhm.
for my patient?
Mhm. Mhm. So resources dwindle because of
Yes.
the capture.
Yeah, I don't know of any treatment center that has a higher level of care, whether it's, you know, intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization, or residential, who isn't captured.
Wow. What are your concerns now, and is there anything else that we haven't covered that you think is really relevant to bring up, and where do you see, yeah, what more do you think that we should have talked about in terms of this?
Well, I'm really concerned about counselor education in general.
Mhm.
I only know my experience, which
Mhm.
was I had a lot of teachers who did not have recent experience. So I would like for that to change. I don't
Mhm.
know if it's like that in other programs, or maybe other programs who, you know, all of their professors, all of the teachers have recent experience, which would be
Mhm.
wonderful.
Mhm.
Um, but I think just in general, I don't know how we get the temperature to cool a little
Mhm.
bit in
Mhm.
terms of people's assumptions about other people, people's political leanings. But
Mhm.
I think it's really important that we get back to basics, get
Mhm.
back to the basics of psychotherapy, really learn what that is, really learn to be with people and see them as complex human beings and not just avatars of race or gender or sexual orientation. People are so much more than that. Um, I'm not really sure how we get there. I know there are some, like there's critical therapy antidote, there's gender exploration, therapy association. You know, there are some associations that are being created and pushing back on this ideology, and just having more space for nuance. having more space for people to be able to voice concerns or disagreement and have it be okay.
Mhm. Do you get a lot of inquiries for your work from clients who are looking for you specifically because you're not pushing any ideology? Has that been a factor in who you're seeing?
No, I haven't. I don't have anything on my like website or profile about that.
Mhm,
I don't have pronouns listed.
mhm,
I've never used she or he or him or her when I'm talking to a person. I've always used you
mhm.
because I'm not referring to them in the third person. So
Right.
it doesn't. So there's people might notice the absence
Mhm,
of something.
mm,
They might, if they were looking at what I have online, which is limited, they might notice an absence of some of the jargon, um, some of the things that people may see
mhm,
on websites or on profiles of people who really push this ideology.
mhm. I'm imagining a growing demand for good counselors and therapy professionals who are not pushing this kind of ideology.
Well, it's not our place to do that.
Mhm,
I mean, and this is actually if you're a counselor, the ACA, the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics is really clear that we are not to be pushing
mhm,
our politics, our values
mhm,
on people. That's
mhm,
not something we're supposed to do.
mhm,
And when you try to do that, you deprive people of their agency. That's not helpful.
mhm. Do you have any recommendations for people if they're curious where to find you, for instance? Do you have a place where you have a listing, a website, or a blog that you'd like to promote?
I don't have a blog. My website's a little bit of a mess right now. It's jennyrogerstherapy.com.
Okay.
It badly needs updating. Um, I'm not taking new patients right now.
Okay.
Um, but some places to look might be look for the absence of things. Like if you're on Psychology Today, if you see that somebody has their profile and they're not listing pronouns, or they're not, putting this is a whatever affirming space,
Mhm.
um, look for that.
Okay.
That's probably a way of it's a subtle signal of I'm not just going to push an ideology.
Mhm.
And I'm also that's to me that's a signal of I'm not going to see you as a victim,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is important.
Mhm. So looking for those bios that seem a little more neutral in
Hmm.
terms of this stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a good idea. Right. Thank you so much for speaking with me, and thank you for sharing your perspectives and your experiences.
you're
Is
welcome.
there any final thoughts?
I'm really happy that you're doing this. I have been quiet for a long time, and when I see people like you or I think it was Christine
Stephen?
Safin. Yeah, Christine
Mhm,
Safin.
mhm,
When I see people in Critical Therapy Antidote,
mhm,
just poking their heads up and speaking out, it gives me the courage to do the same. My guess is a lot of people feel very similar to how we feel,
mhm,
and they're not speaking up. And
mhm.
so the more that people can speak up, it gives people permission to do the same.
Yes, I think you're right, and I hope so. I hope more people start finding the courage and the boldness to go ahead and say this isn't right.
Yeah. And to say the really, offensive statement of we need to see people as individuals in their full complexity, in the
Yeah,
good and the bad.
yeah,
That shouldn't be a controversial statement, but right now it is.
I know. Isn't that strange?
Mhm.
Mhm. Well, Jenny, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was really nice talking to you.
It was nice to talk with you too.